Should I start?
Yes.
Good evening and a very happy 74th Independence Day to all of you. I am Mrunal Thorat, welcome you to this second part of the second Knowledge Series webinar under the auspices of Salute India wing of Maharashtra Seva Sangh. To begin with, our sincere apologies for this delay because today's speaker, retired Wing Commander Shashikant Koppikar sir, is having some problems with his internet and there is some connectivity issue. We were trying to resolve it till this time, but it seems that there are some problems still and he is trying to resolve that. So till he resolves the problems, we are going to start with some other program. Before that, I'll just give you a brief introduction about Maharashtra Seva Sangha, under which aegis we are holding this program. Maharashtra Seva Sangha is an organization socially active for last more than 80 years, and we conduct programs and activities in a variety of fields such as science and technology, economics, art and culture, health and medicine, women empowerment, trekking and mountaineering, etc. About 5 years ago, Maharashtra Seva Sangha launched Salute India initiative, mainly with the objective of bridging the gap between our defense forces and common man, and also to create awareness and a sense of respect towards our men and women in uniform and their families. So in last 5 years, Salute India has organized a number of programs like lectures, workshops, and interviews with active participation from our armed forces. Notable among these programs were 3 grand exhibitions of the Indian Army, Indian Navy, and Indian Air Force, with a total footfall of more than 15,000 visitors, majority among them being school and college students, since making youth aware and enthusiastic about armed forces as a career option is one of Salute India's objectives. Another prominent event hosted for last 5 years every year by Salute India is Prerana Puraskar. These are awards to the veterans of the armed forces. Today's knowledge series was divided in 2 parts, one of which you have already attended yesterday by retired Air Marshal Arun Garud sir, who expertly unraveled the geographical challenges in Himalayan terrain and the scope of aerial warfare in that region. Today, we were going to learn about evolution of fighter planes from triplane to the present day stealth designs from today's eminent speaker, retired Wing Commander Shashikant Koppikar sir, who is trying to resolve his internet problems. So till he does that and joins back to us, we are going to call upon stage here Mr. Rochan Kulkarni, who is an expert in aero modeling, and he is an aero modeling instructor at the prestigious National Defense Academy at Khadakwasla. He has more than 200 fighter aero models, miniature aero models, and helicopters. And he is going to show these models to us. It's a unique opportunity. He was, as it is, going to do that at the later part of the program. We are just shifting it beforehand so that we can continue with this program till Koppikar sir joins us. Thank you. Rochan, Mr. Rochan, I hand over the further proceedings to you. A hearty welcome to you and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mrunal. Very good evening, everyone. Jai Hind, and wish you a very happy Independence Day. So, as Mrunal has introduced me to you all, so let me take you to a small museum that I have created. So here you will be having a look at various different types of fighter planes, evolution of fighter planes to the present era, how it happened, and also how attack helicopters have evolved. So let's go and take a look at it. Yes. So what you're looking at, this object is the first ever primitive aircraft designed by Leonardo da Vinci, and name of this flying object is aerial screw. So the reason it is called aerial screw because the head is like a screw and you have a central shaft. It never flew actually, but it is a very, very primitive helicopter model that I have. So as we all know that Wright brothers were the main pioneers of a powered aircraft, and they were also to get the first ever military contract. So soon after Wright brothers developed their first ever aircraft, World War I was started. And mostly it was fought in Europe, and aerial warfare was not that developed in initial stages of World War I, but later on it got developed. So World War I was mostly of trench warfare. Trenches are big burrows, and soldiers they hide inside the trenches and they fight or they try to conquer each other. So trenches were so vast. Let's say example of biggest trenches was 50 kilometers and more than that. So such trenches were constructed, and it was very difficult for to conquer an enemy trench. So job of pilots was to just go up in the air, draw the location of where exactly enemy is hiding in the trench, land back, and give it to the army for further attack. So simple aircrafts were there, as you can see here. This is a very simple World War I aircraft. It is a biplane. As you can see, there are two wings, one above each other. And this is also a biplane of Indian Air Force, which is called as Tiger Moth. So Tiger Moth was inducted into Indian Air Force, and it was mostly a trainer aircraft where Indian pilots were trained how to fly. Later on, the Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane aircraft. So later on, when pilots used to draw maps of trenches, people realized that how to keep our trenches hidden, or so that our enemy location or our location is not visible to our enemy. So one day what happened is a German pilot, he took a shotgun with him and he tried to shoot an enemy aircraft. So this is how people realized that fighter aircrafts or aircrafts can be able to shoot each other down. Hence, fighter planes were fitted with machine guns, but there was a problem. So how to shoot that machine gun? So before that, some machine guns were fitted at the top of the wing, some were fitted behind the wing. But what happened is there was main problem where the propeller is rotating, you can't shoot through it. So most of the pilots and aircrafts were down shooting their own propellants. Hence, a German aviation pioneer, he designed his own plane or the synchronization method. Hence, the gun was fitted right behind the propeller, and a new technique was developed, which was called as propeller synchronization technique. So whenever the pilot used to shoot the machine gun, the propeller used to wait in the center, or it used to be still in the center. The bullet used to pass, and again the propeller used to rotate. So such techniques were developed by the German pioneers. And what you're looking at here is a Fokker DR aircraft, which is a biplane again. And at the back, what you're looking at is a Fokker D7, which is a triplane. And it is a very famous triplane of Red Baron. It was called as a Red Baron. He was a flying ace of World War I. And you can see here, it is the plane is colored in red purposely, and it is a triplane, one above each other, three wings. Now, here are another triplanes where this is a SPAD. It's a French triplane here, and below that it is Sopwith Camel. It is a British triplane. So World War I mostly later on was of close fights, which was called as dogfight. So dogfights and dogfight, what we do is we try to get on or behind enemy aircraft and shoot it down. So certain rules and certain techniques were also developed, and like yesterday, Air Marshal Garud sir has explained, certain formations were also there right from World War I, where in formation used to attack enemy aircraft or airfield and so on. So World War I was a very primitive war, or very you can say a very old age war, where airplanes were very slow. They were made up of wood and cloth. So basically flying in the air or just sustaining in the air was very difficult, because if one bullet used to pierce your wing, then the entire aircraft used to get down or it used to crash in the ground. So hence World War I ended. So later on, all the countries who used to design all the aircraft, they started developing their own techniques and own models. And later on, when World War II started, so aircraft also got evolved. What you're looking at is a famous dogfight here between a German plane. This is a ME-109 and a Spitfire. So this is a famous scene from Battle of Britain. As we all know that if you have seen movies like Dunkirk, you must have seen these two warplanes fighting against each other. Very, very historic fight and a historic movie also. So airplanes got developed. Now you can see the wing is more prominent. Metal was introduced in most of the parts of aircraft, and airplanes were also fitted with cannons and more powerful machine guns. So here what you're looking at is a P-51 Mustang. It's a very, very renowned fighter plane of World War II, fitted with Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. And very interesting fact about World War II is all the leading automotive manufacturers that we have now, like Mitsubishi, Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, they were all making aero engines for all these countries. So whatever engines were fitted in the vehicles, more powerful engines than that were fitted in the air. So aero engines were mostly designed by Fiat, example is. So all these aero engines were designed by such automotive companies. So this is a model of P-51 Mustang, where very renowned fighter plane, and this is a Japanese Zero aircraft, where below also you can see it is a Japanese aircraft. Now, how to identify which country aircraft it is? So you can identify by the sign on the wing and on the fuselage on the main body. So now the circle resembles a Japanese plane, as Japan was called as a rising sun. So it is a Japanese plane, and the P-51 Mustang is an American plane. You can see the American symbol on its fuselage here. Now, coming back to other fighter planes of World War II, this is a Bf-109 again, then P-40 Warhawk aircraft, and the Spitfire again. So you can see the prominent difference in the wings and the structure. Some aircraft, they have 5 propellers, some have 4 propellers, and some have only 3 propellers here. So this is for extra power generation and extra maneuverability in the air. So such advance and the development happened in World War II here. So in World War II again, I would like to show you bombers also got developed. And in World War I, bombing was not that prominent. Bombing was also done by hand, just by minor adjustment. Pilots used to just drop bombs, and bombs were also not that devastating, or they were not that having an effect on whatever is below or whatever they used to attack. But in World War II, where they were quite devastating, and the bombers were also developed. So what you're looking at here is a Lancaster bomber, and here what you see here is a Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane. They are giving it air cover to this Lancaster bomber, and below that you can see the bay, bombing bay is open, and you can see a big bomb that is loaded on this aircraft. So this is a Lancaster bomber that we have. This is some other aircrafts of World War II. Yes. Now coming to again the big weapons or the big bomber aircraft. So what you're looking at here is an American B-17 Flying Fortress. And this is a B-29 Flying Fortress. This is a very historic aircraft. The reason behind it is it carried the first ever nuclear bomb, that is which America bombed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is Little Boy, and I don't remember the other name. So this is an heroic aircraft that you can see here. Now coming back to a very interesting fact about jet planes in World War II. So as we know that, yes, Fat Man and Little Boy. Thank you, Tejas. So what aircraft we are looking at are called as Hitler's secret weapon. So this is Me-262. This is Messerschmitt 262. The first ever operational jet ever built by Germany, which was very, very powerful. It was having jet engines equipped, and this is a Comet, very, very advanced aircraft at that time. You can see that there is no vertical tail on this aircraft. It is very, very flat. It is designed on a flying wing concept. Later on, we will be looking at how in modern era, how this design has been useful in fighter aircraft. So later on in after World War II, a secret war was started between USSR and America, which was called as the Cold War. So fighter aircrafts also got developed. America had its own fighter aircrafts like F-4 Phantom and F-86 Sabre aircraft, which you are looking at here. And the Russians were having MiG-15 and MiG-17 aircraft, which was primary aircraft. Now let's look at the MiG series of aircraft, which is MiG. As we all know that the full form is Mikhail Gruvich. So what you're looking at here is a MiG-21 aircraft. We in Indian Air Force, we were having a major strength. We still have a strength of MiG-21 aircraft, Type 77, Type 76, Type 96, and a Bison, which is an upgraded version of it. So this is a MiG model here. Then we have MiG-23. This is a MiG-23 aircraft, and MiG-17 here. And the latest MiG aircraft as we have is MiG-29. As we all know that MiG-29, the upgraded version of it, is deployed at Leh, which is closely keeping an eye along with Su-30 aircraft and Mirage 2000. So this is a model of MiG-29 aircraft, and it is equipped with R-77 and R-73 air-to-air missiles. These are close-range missiles. This is a long-range missile. You can see here. Yes, coming back to a very interesting thing about stealth aircraft. So stealth is basically a technology where you are being hidden, or you fly a secret mission and you are not detected by the enemy. So after Cold War, it was necessary that you keep or you spy on enemy, and you come to know or you get high-end information of what enemy is doing and so on. So stealth aircrafts were developed, and America developed its own stealth aircraft, mostly U-2 and SR-71. So what you're looking at is a legendary aircraft, that is SR-71 Blackbird. So this aircraft holds the most world records in the world, mostly world's altitude record, that is 80,000 feet and above. So this aircraft did a photographic mission of USSR, and it flew at 80,000 feet, and it captured all the vital information, and it landed back. So this is SR-71 Blackbird. This aircraft is no longer in service, as better aircrafts are there. So this is a primitive and legendary aircraft. Now, evolution of stealth aircraft. So what model you are looking at is F-117 Nighthawk. It was used in Kosovo and Desert Storm campaign by United States. So it is a complete stealth aircraft. So now you can see the shape, how it is designed. So you have diamond-like cuts on this aircraft, where the radar waves, if they are bombarded on the surface of this aircraft, they are easily diverted or they are easily deflected away. So engines are also inside, so they emit less radar signature or less heat from the engine. So this is a very, very interesting stealth aircraft called F-117 Nighthawk. And coming to the modern stealth plane, what you're looking at is a B-2 bomber. Now, interesting fact about B-2 bomber is when World War I ended, American forces, they reached secret German facility where they found this Comet bomber. And Americans, they took this bomber back to their base and they studied this. And based on this, a B-2 bomber was later on prepared. So you can see how technology got evolved, and this is how America started developing their own planes. So very, very interesting B-2 bomber stealth aircraft. As you can see, there are no vertical control surface. Everything is flat. Engines are hidden inside to emit less heat, and the radar signature is less. Now, this is F-35C Lightning aircraft. So this aircraft is made by 5 countries, mostly Germany. After World War II, Germany were not able to create their own aircraft, but later on now, as they are advanced, they have created their own technology in this F-35C aircraft. And this is again American YF-23 and F-22 Raptor, advanced 5th generation aircraft that we have. Yes, coming to naval aircraft, these are model of Sea Harrier aircraft, where as we know that Sea Harriers are mostly capable of vertically takeoff and landing. So this is a BAE Sea Harrier aircraft, and this is another version of Sea Harrier again. Now, interesting fact is the nozzles of the Harrier basically they turn, and that is the reason the thrusters it is able to land like a helicopter. And once it is at a certain altitude, the thrusters they become straight, and this is how again Sea Harrier does its normal vision. So this is a model of Sea Harrier here. Then American F series. So as we know that F series is quite large. So this is F-14 Phantom. Now interesting fact about F-14 Tomcat. Interesting fact about this aircraft, it's a swept wing, variable swept wing aircraft, where depending on the speed of the aircraft, the computer decides how the wing position is. If you want to go totally supersonic, then the wings are totally retracted. If you want to land, or if the speed is slightly slow, then the wings they change the position accordingly. So F-4 Tomcat, F-14 Tomcat, and this is an F-15 aircraft. This is F-18, the naval variant, and this is an Air Force variant. And the famous F-16 aircraft, which Wing Commander Abhinandan shot down at Balakot after Balakot. This is an F-16 Fighting Falcon. Now coming back to the 4.5 generation aircraft, that is modern fighters. Now, as we all know that this is a Sukhoi 30 MKI aircraft. So now the very distinctive feature about this aircraft is the canards. What you're looking at here is, now canards are extra control surface, which actually makes the aircraft unstable in the air. So what happens is when the wind is coming onto the air, and when you don't have the canards, the aircraft generally is stable. But when you have this canards, it makes it more unstable, and that is the reason it can do certain maneuvers in the air, like Cobra maneuver is there, then tumble top maneuver is there. Certain maneuvers which is not other aircrafts are not able to perform, but this aircraft does it. So this is a model of Sukhoi 30 MKI. This is Su-27 at the back. Again, this is Su-7 aircraft. We also were having this aircraft during 1971 war. Now, these are some American ground attack aircraft. A-10 Warthog, one of the best ground attack aircraft in the world. Now coming to helicopters, this is Germany's Eurocopter Tiger. Then we have Apache. Then naval helicopter here is Mi-24 Hind. Then this is Seahawk. The Sea King helicopter. And this is a Sea Knight helicopter here. Now these are some modern fighter plane collection that I have. Electronic warfare expert, that is A6E Intruder and Mirage 2000. These are some Sukhoi variants. Eurofighter F-22. Again, these are modern airplanes. These are some attack and multi-role helicopters. This is a model of Mi-17 helicopter, which is a medium lift helicopter of Indian Air Force. This is a 1V series, and the latest we have V5 series also. Then this is a Cheetah helicopter. Cheetah helicopter, and this is again Mi-35 helicopter variant of it. Now, coming back to our today's presentation. Today I'll be telling you some specification and information about Apache helicopters. What you're looking at is an Apache AH-64E variant, that is longbow variant of it. So it is a very advanced all-weather day and night heavy attack helicopter, which is also called as a flying tank. We have inducted 22 Apache helicopters into Indian Air Force recently. And we are all aware that this advanced attack helicopter is deployed at India, China, and Pakistan border, along with Chinook and other attack helicopters. Now, specifications of this helicopter it is called as a flying tank. The reason behind it is heavily armored from all the sides, which is able to withstand small and medium enemy fire. So it has a crew of 2, the weapon system operator and the pilot who flies the helicopter, who sits in a bulletproof Kevlar armor. It has 2 powerful turboshaft engines with 4 main rotors and 2 tail rotors. You can see here there are 2 tail rotors. Now these two turboshaft engines makes it extremely maneuverable with a top speed of 365 kilometers per hour, and in the extreme weather conditions 3 to 5 kilometers per hour is the top speed of this helicopter. Now let's look at various sensors that this helicopter has. Now in the nose of this helicopter here is all the FLIR cameras which give day and night vision to the pilot. It detects the target. It gives first-hand information to the pilot, both in day and night. Then at the top of this is a longbow radar here, the disc-like structure that you see. Now this radar is able to track 250 targets at 50 kilometers of radius, and also it acts as a command post. So if you have 3 longbow helicopters in the air, they act like a command post, and they give vital information of enemy to other helicopters and other aircraft as well. Along with that, it has the latest jamming system which jams enemy radars, and they also create fake signature to them. Now let's look at the anti-tank weapon. The major or primary weapon of this helicopter is Hellfire anti-tank missile. This is a standoff missile with a range of 8 kilometers. In all, 16 missiles can be carried. Then we have Hydra 70 rocket. This is a rocket pod that you see here. This is a Hydra pod. This is a rocket pod that you see here. This is a Hellfire missile, and it also has air-to-air missile. This is a Stinger air-to-air missile for slow-moving aircraft and helicopters. So this helicopter can target slow-moving aircraft and other helicopters as well. Along with that, for close attack, we have a machine gun here. This is a chin gun, 30 mm chin gun, capable of firing 1200 rounds per minute, attached to the weapon system operator helmet mounted sight. So wherever the weapon system operator is looking at the target, the chin gun will automatically be shifted, or it will move towards that direction. Now let us look at the other helicopter that is deployed along with Apache. So what you're looking at is CH-47 Chinook heavy transport helicopter, capable of rapid mobilization of special forces, howitzers, and cargo. It is also capable of flying at both day and night missions. Now the specifications are it can carry up to 10,000 kgs of cargo. Now interesting fact about this helicopter is it has 2 tandem rotor arrangement or tandem rotors, equal rotors for the front and for the back engine. So it gives it immense performance at high altitudes. In all, 54 troops with full gear can be carried in the helicopter. Now armament, it has 2 machine guns, one at the front door and one at the bay here. I don't have a machine gun to show you now in this helicopter, but it is fitted generally here. Now interesting fact about this helicopter is, as you know that there is no tail for the helicopter. So it makes it easier for, let's say, if you want to carry your troops or if you want to evacuate your troops from a cliff of the mountain. So generally a tail helicopter is not able to land or is not able to hover at the cliff, but this helicopter is able to hover at the cliff or at a certain position where this helicopter will lower its bay. Your troops can be loaded inside and it can take off again. So this is very, very interesting fact about this helicopter, which is a tailless helicopter. Now along with Along with Chinook and Apache helicopters, we also have indigenous helicopters which are deployed along China and Pakistan border, which are light combat helicopter and the advanced light helicopter, that is Rudra variant of it. So towards your left side, you're looking at light combat helicopter, and towards your right side, you're looking at the Rudra variant of advanced light helicopter. They both are indigenous helicopters. They are extremely potent. They have indigenous engines fitted in them, mostly Shakti engines. They also carry the latest electronic warfare suits, along with rocket pods, air-to-air missiles, and 20 chin mounted guns. Now let's talk about the other flying objects, which are called as unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. Yes. So this is a drone model. As we know that drones play a vital role in surveillance and gathering live inputs from the battlefield, our army at our forward post are equipped with similar drones which are fitted with thermal and night vision cameras and are keeping an eye on our adversary. So similar drones like this are equipped with our army ground forces, and they are fitted with night vision and thermal cameras where they give pre-hand information of enemy activity along with the line of control. So these drones, you can also make similar drones. The kits are available in the market, but there are proper guidelines, and you also need to take care that you don't break the rules. There are certain rules now that are put by Director General of Civil Aviation. You need to follow those rules, and you can prepare your own drone. And later on, you can also attach a camera if you have a proper permission. So this is a model of drone that we have. So here I come to end with my presentation or a small museum that model or the development of planes that I have. So if you want to ask me any questions, you are most welcome. I will try to answer them.
Thank you, Rochan. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. What a beautiful museum.
Thank you, sir.
It was a great tour to kind of a miniature entire Indian Air Force air power, displaying air power. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Rochan, you are anyway a part of this presentation. Because of this particular problem, we had to take your presentation earlier. After going through the slides and PPT, going to the models was the original plan. But anyway, thank you very much. This was a great presentation of models and a demo. And you are always a part of our exhibitions. I would like to tell all the participants that Rochan has been always a part of our exhibitions, and we always enjoy his models and war scenarios that he creates in the exhibition. So thank you, Rochan, very much.
Thank you,
and
sir.
Now let's try.
Proud to be associated with Maharashtra Seva Samdaya.
Yeah, you are a part of us.
Yes.
And we are proud of you, Rochan. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now Kopikar sir is already with us in the meeting. May I request you, Kopikar sir, to check whether you are able to present. Kopikar sir? Would you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, we can see you, sir.
Okay.
We would just like to check your audio.
There is a bit of disturbance, but it is better than the
Yes,
previous time.
it is better. So what I request you, sir, uh, first of all, let me request Brunal to give a very brief introduction of Kopikar, sir, since it is pending because you are not able to connect. So Brunal, may I request you to... Brunal, may I request you to introduce the audience with Kopikar, sir? Hello. Yes, Brunal, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So I'll give a brief introduction about our today's speaker. Retired Wing Commander Kopikar sir is 1964 graduate of the esteemed National Defense Academy at Khadakwasla. He was commissioned in the Indian Air Force in 1965. He has flown 6,500 hours on DHC-3 Avro 748 and Canberra bomber and is qualified as flying instructor, VIP pilot and examiner. He is a postgraduate in military studies from Defense Services Staff College and has held staff appointments in Air Headquarters. After 20 years of service, he retired from Indian Air Force, and during his tenure, he was awarded the Distinguished Vayu Sena Medal. Then he joined Air India and was a senior executive pilot there. And he has flown Airbus 300, Airbus 310, and Boeing 747. He retired from Air India in 2009 and delved in the field of consulting up to 2014, wherein he mainly handled 6 airport projects. Currently, he is a visiting faculty in aviation management for Dr. D.Y. Patil School of Management and Symbiosis School of Management, Pune. He is also a contributor in geopolitics and aviation for print and TV panel discussions. Salute India teams a special bond. We hold a special bond with Kopikar sir, as he has been the mentor of Salute India right since its inception. We welcome you, sir. And now I hand over the proceedings to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrunal.
Yeah, let us try your screen, sir. Yes, we can see your screen now.
I should be able to see me now.
Yes, yes, we are able to see. So now you can click on the presentation.
Stand by 30
Yes.
seconds.
Yeah, yeah. I think it will start. In case we find any difficulty with the PPT, I mean the screen sharing, in that case, we can simply speak about it if we are not able to see the PPT. There seems to be some lag. Yeah, it is opening now.
Yeah.
If it opens, we'll be able to run through at least for a few minutes. And
It's opening up.
yes, 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 it has opened now. We can see the first slide.
I'm maximizing it. Just stand by.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Make it full screen, please.
Okay, clear now?
Yes, it is clear. Only thing is, since we have run up time quite a lot, we may have to run
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
a
I
little
thought.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, sir. Please take over. Yes.
Good evening, viewers, and my very sincere apologies for the delay in presenting my presentation. But they say when faced with technical glitches, one can only try and sort them out. Let me start by wishing you all a very happy Independence Day and a very secure and safe year from now onwards. Today's presentation is supposed to be India-centric. However, taking into account the need to put the things in proper perspective, in a few places, I have included bits and pieces from the world scene, and I hope that will contextualize the entire presentation. So let's get going. And before that, a disclaimer, I do not claim to have access to any secret or confidential information, and whatever I am presenting
Sir, are you speaking? Your audio is not clear.
aircraft was used. The material used was wood and fabric. The pilot carried the bombs in a bag, and when over the target, he dropped them one by one, picking up from the bag. One or two guns were fitted just outside the cockpit he could reach. The best known fighter pilot at the time was the German Manfred von Richthofen, nicknamed fondly as Red Baron even by his enemies. And an image of his fighter plane can be seen in the slide ahead of you. This is the next step in which tubular metal construction was used. The cockpits were still open, and in the front part of the aircraft, you can see two open cockpits. The pilot sat in the rear one, and the front cockpit was occupied by specialized gunners who had access to two guns. In between, there was a steady progression of aircraft as we approached the Second World War. The Second World War gave an impetus to technological advancements. On the left, you can see the workhorse of the British Royal Air Force, the Spitfire. You can see the sleek lines and very powerful engines giving it a top speed of about 430 miles per hour. The construction was metallic. During the last dying months of the war, the Germans were able to build a jet fighter, which is displayed on the right side of your screen. However, the arrival of this aircraft was too late, and it could not help the Germans facing a defeat. Let's step back a little and look at the Indian Air Force. The Indian Air Force, or the Royal Indian Air Force as was known at that time, was born in 1932, and the first aircraft which flew is on your screen, named Wapiti. All metal construction, but open cockpits and a biplane, that is a wing in two parts. quantum jump ahead, skipping all the progressive aircraft in between to our latest darling, the Rafale. You can see the slick lines. Some of the features were already explained to you yesterday by Air Marshal Garud, and some, I missed that part, but I suppose have been explained to you by Roshan Kulkarni. It is a 4.5 generation aircraft, but more about this a little later. Let us now look at the types of modern fighting aircraft. The first category is the fighter interceptors, which carry out dogfights with enemy fighters in the air and try and shoot them down. Then there are bombers, fairly heavy aircraft, which carry bombs mostly in their belly and then drop them over the targets in the enemy territory. Next come the multi-role fighters, and after that, the omni-role fighters. The difference between the two will be explained a little later to you. Next, we come to the armed helicopters. Most of the features of the armed helicopters have already been explained to you by Roshan Kulkarni. The last category that we will be covering are the directional or dimensional remotely operated navigation equipment, acronymed drones. Although the word directional dimensions are used interchangeably, in the military parlance, the word directional is used more often than dimensional. Also used for similar vehicles is the word unmanned aerial vehicles, acronym UAVs, or the word remotely piloted vehicles, which is RPV. Let's look now at the characteristics of the modern fighters. The modern fighter has an all-metal body shell. It is capable of very tight maneuvers. In technical language, it is called the high G maneuvers. They are powered by jet engines, which are capable of giving the aircraft very high forward speeds, in excess of the speed of sounds, and very high climb rates. For instance, Rafale has a climb rate of 60,000 feet per minute. The modern fighter has a very high degree of electronic sophistication, a very high degree of computerization, and a high degree of artificial intelligence fitted into it. Little bit more about this a bit later. One word here about the electronic sophistication. The number of systems fitted in a modern fighter are so many that a modern fighter pilot has not only got to fly the aircraft, but he also has to be a very competent systems manager. The next characteristic we come to is the stealth ability of the aircraft. That is, its ability to stay hidden from the enemy's detection radars. The engineering inputs that go into making it a stealth fighter are multidisciplinary. First, there is the aero engineering. Next, there is the chemical engineering, and third, there is the metallurgical engineering, among others. There could be a certain amount of electronic engineering as well. Next, we come to most of the modern fighters are capable of air-to-air refueling. This has been explained to you yesterday by Air Marshal Garud. Next, we come to head-up or helmet-mounted displays. Some characteristics of helmet-mounted displays were explained to you by Roshan Kulkarni when he explained Apache and the chin-mounted gun. Basically, apart from acquiring the target, the head-up display or the helmet-mounted display make it available to the pilot on his front windscreen or on the helmet screen. The speed, altitude, target location, etc., and a couple of other important parameters. So the need for the pilot to look down at the instruments and then look up again and risk disorientation is reduced. I mentioned electronics, and here are some words more about them. Fly-by-wire control system. Some explanation. You see, in the civil aircraft, the aircraft is designed for stability as the basic parameter. When disturbed from its position, unwittingly, it tends to regain control to a stable position. As against this, in a fighter aircraft, the fighter pilots needs a lot of maneuverability. A certain amount of instability is built into a fighter aircraft. However, there is a point of optimization in it. And there is a computer built into the system which prevents the aircraft or the pilot from going into the zone in which the aircraft is uncontrollable. So a fine balance has to be achieved between control and maneuverability. And all those maneuvers that you see a fighter aircraft doing on the Republic Day fly past or at some other air displays are because of its ability to maneuver the aircraft in so many maneuvers. A couple of them were mentioned by Roshan, like Cobra maneuver, etc. Then the next important part of the electronics is radars for target acquisition. As has been already explained to you, the modern day fighter radars and some of the armed helicopters are capable of detecting dozens of targets at one time and distinguishing them from one another. That is, the static targets on the ground are distinguished from moving targets in the air, small targets, big targets, heat emitting targets, and so on. Then there are the systems for selection and launching the correct weapon systems, which are coupled to the above reader. The combination of the two in real time selects a weapon appropriate to the target that is selected and launches it. And all this is done in a matter of a couple of seconds. The next point is the anti-jamming, shielding, or detecting and jamming the enemy systems. This was also mentioned to you yesterday as well as by Roshan Kulkarni today. Many of the modern aircraft are shielded by anti-jamming electronics, which put up, so to say, an electronic wall around them, which deflect the anti-jamming signals of the ground radars of the enemy. The aircraft is also fitted with systems which detect the frequencies which the enemy is using and can jam them. Next, I mentioned stealth, and here are the few examples. Some of these have already been explained to you by Roshan, but I'll go a bit further. Let's start from the top. You can see the tail heights and the fins. Instead of having one tall tail, the tail is bifurcated into two. What this does is it acts against identification in two ways. Firstly, it reduces the tail surface detectable by the radar. And secondly, because the radars operate on an electronic wavelength signal, by reducing the tail or the height, the currently used radar wavelengths are prevented from detecting the tails, which are one of the most prominent ways of detecting an aircraft. Next, I had earlier in the previous slide mentioned chemical engineering. The entire stealth aircraft is chemically coated with certain secrets. secretly constituted chemicals which either absorb the radar electronic waves or which disturb and disperses them in a random manner so as to make the identification of the aircraft difficult. Then there are the engine intake designs. This design constitutes both the location of the intake and the shape. That is why you see so many of the intakes designed in a particular way only. Through wind tunnel testing, they decide which of these shapes and locations will render minimum identification facility to the enemy radar, and then that is how it is installed onto the aircraft. The next major component of the stealth is the cockpit canopy, which is also chemically coated. This chemical is, however, transparent and different from the chemical that is coated over the rest of the aircraft. But the result is the same: dispersal and disruption of the radar electronic waves. We next come to the B-2B bomber, the Spirit bomber, as one of the viewers, visitors called it in his message, and which is also officially called as such. Here, notice, in the previous slide I had said bifurcation and reduction in the height of the tail. Here the B-2 bomber comes without any tail, making it that much more difficult for radars to identify it. Roshan Kulkarni also pointed out the setting of the engine intakes. Look at it, they are set far behind the leading edge of the wing. And if you look exactly behind these four engines, you will see black patches, which are infrared ray absorber and heat absorber, therefore making this bomber that much less identifiable by a missile or the ground fire, which is designed to home on to an infrared heat signature. We are back to our own Rafale. It is part stealth, and it is called that because it has engine intakes which are located optimally in a position and in a design which will make it difficult for the enemy radar to identify. There is a lot of discussion going on various forums and even on some of the news channels about the Chinese J-2 Chengdu stealth fighter. Well, the Chinese have a habit of exaggerating their own abilities, and J-20 Chengdu is one of the examples. Although they claim that it is fully stealth, analysts are pointing out that it is only partly stealth, and it is fully stealth when it is viewed from the front, like you are seeing it now on the screen. From the rest of the aspects, it is not fully stealth. As a matter of fact, as is pointed out at the bottom of the slide, the Indian radars have detected this fighter on their screen, and they have been able to obtain its radar signature and store it. You will hear a lot of talk about the fighter generation and the talk about fourth generation, fifth generation, and so on. I have mentioned the first and second generation, but we'll skip it because out of the aircraft mentioned in the slide, none of them are now flying with the Indian Air Force. We'll come to the third generation. Two of the aircraft that I mentioned are MiG-21 and Mirage 2000, which have been introduced in the 1960s and 1980s. They have better electronics than the first and second generation. They have better all-weather and night operability. They have afterburners in the engine. A word about the afterburner. Afterburner is a device which injects additional fuel into the exhaust, the hot exhaust of the basic engine, putting in more energy in the burning that results, which gives the fighter extra speed, extra rate of climb, extra maneuverability, etc. The third generation fighters are also supersonic. They can exceed the speed of sound in level flight. Many of these fighters, which were of 1960s to 1980s origin, were upgraded about 10 to 15 years ago. Some of them are still being upgraded now. And after electronic upgradation, the MiG-21 that we have, or the certain variants of it, have moved up to generation 3.5 from 3, and Mirage 2000 has moved close to generation 4. Now, what is generation 4? It has even more advanced electronics like onboard radar, the weapon radar detector, a guidance system, all-weather operability. They are high supersonic. Instead of 1.1 or 1.2 times the speed of sound, they can go up to 1.8, 1.9, or even 2 to 2.1. Upgraded Pak F-16 is generation 4 aircraft, whereas the earlier ones were not. And India-specific Rafale is rated at generator 4.5, whereas the earlier generation of Rafale, the origin of which is about 15-year-old, is not generation 4.5, but generation 4. So our own India-specific Rafale is more advanced than the previous generations of Rafale. Then we come to 5th generation aircraft, which we don't have yet, but which we are planning to acquire. They have the latest electronics. They have the enemy radar jamming capability, which has been explained earlier. They themselves have protection from enemy jamming, engineered for stealth from currently operable ground radars. They are high supersonic, and the examples of them are US F-35, B-2B bomber, Russian Su-57, and Chinese Chengdu J-20 as claimed by them. We are trying to develop an Indian Advanced Multi-Role Combat Aircraft, acronymed AMCA, the prototype of which is planned for flying in 2026 and is supposed to be brought into operation in early 2030. Now the role description. You'll hear these words quite often: the fighters, the bombers, the fighter bombers, the multi-role and omni-role. Fighters are capable of defending themselves and attacking enemy aircraft and certain ground targets. Highly maneuverable, usually operate in 2 to 4 aircraft formation, and they have short, relatively short range, like the Tejas. Then there are pure bombers. They have only limited capability to defend themselves, like ejecting some decoys, some flares to distract an attacking rocket or missile, and they have limited maneuverability because they are very heavy. And they usually require a fighter escort. But they have greater bomb carrying capacity, they have very large size and therefore greater fuel capacity, and they acquire very long range. For instance, the bombers based in Diego Garcia are capable of reaching southern and eastern China. And the bombers based in Okinawa, the Japanese island, is capable of reaching the eastern coast of China and the central China. Then there are fighter bombers, which are a compromise between a fighter and a bomber described above. They are of medium range and size, but their weapon capability is quite a bit. Now we come to multi-role and omni-role. There is a fine distinction between the two. Multi-role aircraft are fighter bombers, which can either carry bombs and missiles for ground targets or carry missiles, etc., or guns for attacking the enemy aircraft on a particular mission. On the same mission, they can't carry both. whereas the Omni-Role aircraft, Rafale is one, can carry a variety of weapons for ground attack as well as a variety of missiles and guns for dogfights on the same mission. So on one mission, one and the same mission, an Omni-Role aircraft can carry a greater variety of weapons and carry out attack on the ground as well as defend itself and shoot down an enemy aircraft in the air. We come to armed helicopters. I won't spend much time on it because Roshan has very ably described quite a lot of it. I'll just say that historically the first known use of the armed helicopters was in Vietnam War of the 1960s. Although there were other types of armed helicopters, one peculiar use of the helicopters in Vietnam War was soldiers sitting in open doors of a usually logistic support helicopters, using their guns on enemy on the ground from a low height. The best known attack helicopter was Apache. It is fully operational with IAF deployed in Ladakh and which has been described in sufficient detail by Roshan. So we will go over to the others. Russian Mi-17 V5, which is an armed version of the Mi-17, which was shown by Roshan to you. Then there is HAL manufactured LCH Rudra. This has also been described to you by Roshan. So I will avoid duplication. I'll just say this much, that Rudra is capable of very high altitude. It has been tried out over the highest hills in Ladakh successfully, and it is being progressively operationalized for Ladakh as well. Advantages of an armed helicopter over fighter. In narrow valleys of the type that were shown to you yesterday by Air Marshal Garud, the helicopters are more maneuverable. They can negotiate difficult hilly terrain much better. They provide a better weapon launching platform in such hills and valleys and for small moving targets. Their disadvantage, the very advantage of their slow speed and their ability to hover in air makes them more vulnerable to the ground-based anti-aircraft fire. So they have to be used with proper tactics at the correct time and in the correct place. The last type of an armed flying machine are the drones, UAVs, RPVs. The acronyms were already described to you. How is it used? Well, the pilots sitting at console in USA have been operating armed drones and UAVs for attacking targets in Iraq and Pakistan. The distance between the target and the pilot sitting in USA are anything up to about 8,000 kilometers. And the communication and orders given to these drones are via satellite. Indian forces have small four-rotor quadrocopters, which have been explained to you by Roshan. So I will skip over to the next slide. No fighting Air Force will be complete without sufficient number of aircraft in support roles. So let's take a look at what these support role aircraft are. For logistics and troop movement, for strategic movements, that is a long distance movement, say from Arunachal to Ladakh, will be done for Indian Air Force by aircraft like C-17 and C-130, which were shown to you yesterday by the Air Marshal. The Indian central government also has emergency power to acquire large civil aircraft when required, specifically for strategic movement of troops. Then we come to tactical movements, say within a theater, say within Ladakh. These could be done by a fixed wing AN-32 or the helicopters Chinook and Mi-17 V5, which have already been described to you. Then we come to air-to-air refueling aircraft in a support role. Yesterday you saw a very nice video about air refueling. The aircraft that we have for air-to-air refueling is IL-76 or which is a variant of the aircraft IL-70, IL-78, beg your pardon, which is a variant of IL-76. This is labeled appropriately in military parlance as a force multiplier. Why is it so? Although it was described briefly by Air Marshal Garud, I'll add a few words. Let's say the aircraft takes off from Gwalior. It has to attack a target deep into Pakistan. It carries a full armament load, so it has insufficient fuel to go bomb the target from whatever distance that it is supposed to, whether with standoff weapons or otherwise, and then return. It is possible that it may not have sufficient fuel to land back at Gwalior. And therefore, an air-to-air refueler like IL-78 would be called up for duty. And soon after it enters Indian borders again on the way back, it may be refueled and it may be either able to come back to Gwalior, or if it is required to go on another mission with some of the weapons still remaining, with the addition of the fuel from the tanker, it can turn back towards the enemy and go on a second mission. And that is why it is called a force multiplier. Next we come to airborne early warning and control aircraft. That is Berry A-50 as labeled by the manufacturers themselves, but basically it is another variant of IL-76. The red arrow points to a picture on the left bottom of your screen, and the mushroom-like structure that you see on the top of this aircraft is the electronic package for this aircraft, which gives it the ability for airborne early warning and control. A similar ability to the Embraer A145, which is shown at the bottom right-hand side, is given by the box-like rectangular structure on top of it. And you can see both the IL-76 or A50 is much larger. Embraer 145 is somewhat smaller, but the electronic capability of both is similar. Miscellaneous, there are certain terms which you might hear during the either drawing room talks or on the TV. So let me explain to them. The air superiority means a condition where the Air Force of one side has a clear edge over the other, but can still face some opposition in the air when over the enemy airspace. Some opposition, not complete opposition. Where air dominance is where one side can operate over enemy airspace without any opposition whatsoever. Let me give you an example. In the 1971 war, during the second half, that is the second week of the war, IF had air superiority in the West Pakistan airspace. That is, it still faced some opposition when it went over the Pakistani airspace, but was able to hit targets. But the Indian Air Force had complete air dominance over the then East Pakistan airspace. And like the Air Marshal Garud described yesterday, our Air Force was even able to go right up to the governor's house there and bomb it, which expedited their surrender. And this was in the second half of the war. You will also hear the word aerospace used instead of the usual atmosphere of the Earth. When the word aerospace is used, it refers not only to the Earth's atmosphere, but it includes the space above the atmosphere. That is, includes the atmosphere and the space above it. And this space is basically used by ballistic missiles and or satellites. Why has this assumed importance? Because USA, Russia and China are deeply into it, and India has made a beginning last year by hitting a redundant satellite that was orbiting in the space and destroying it. That is a good beginning, and let's hope that we'll move fast in that direction. Last, I come to the challenges which the IIF faces. A word of caution on my behalf. I'm not interested in party politics. So whatever I say there is as a neutral observer, as neutral student. And for those of you who hear these words very often, but are unable to comprehend what exactly is the challenge faced by IIF. The first challenge that is faced is excessive reliance on imports, especially the Russian bit, like Su-30, MiG-29, IL-76, AN-12, AN-32, the helicopters, several guns for the army, and so on, rifles. What this does is that by having about 70 to 75% of the imports from Russia alone for all three services combined, India is forced to maintain a kind of diplomatic neutrality vis-a-vis USA, even when it may or may not want to do so. I'm saying may or may not want to do so. Second, the development cycle of new fighters domestically produced is too long. Regardless of who is to be blamed, the fact remains that the IIF has to bear the brunt. Inability to develop suitable aero engines and required electronics. There is a persistent problems with the budget constraints and procurement procedures, and the result is our squadron strength is reduced by 1/3. As far as the budget constraints are concerned, I understand that there are conflicting requirements like health, education, infrastructure, etc. But we will have to do some out-of-the-box thinking and find the money that is required for the legitimate demands of the IIF and the other two services. Then there is the unwillingness that was quite visible to rope in private sector in manufacturing till recently. But things are changing, and I'm glad to say that they're changing quite fast now. And soon, I think you are likely to see public-private partnership projects coming into defense production also. However, the net result of all the challenge that the IIF faces is that we have sufficient resources for a two-front war, but those resources will be stretched and we will have to use utmost skill and resource management to fight a two-front war and win it. But it is possible, and I'm very optimistic that we will do so when the time comes. Thank you. Jai Hind. And now, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, sir, for a very informative session. So without taking much time, I'll just start with the questions. For the first question, I'd like to club a few, 2-3 questions together. So there was a question about Russian aircrafts, whether they are suited for Russian environment and not so good in Indian environment. So what are your views about that? Second is, when there is generation 5 available, why we are still going for generation 4.5? And the third question was about the medium multi-role aircraft deal to acquire 110 fighter aircrafts, and which has the best chance. So I thought I'll just club together since they are related to each other. And if you could go ahead with that.
Okay, I'll do that. Are the answers for all 3 questions. I'll start with the first one first. You see, there is nothing wrong with the Russian equipment as such. You see, what happens is that whenever we acquire any imported defense equipment, the respective service projects a certain qualitative requirement that's known as qualitative QRs. And the exporter from the foreign country has to meet these requirements. I mentioned an India-specific Rafale. The same goes for most of the other equipment also. Even Russian aircraft, when they are inducted, they have certain India-specific requirements fitted into them. And if the aircraft or the other equipment was not suitable to India, rest assured, we will not buy them. You see, after all, the exporting country also earns some money by selling this equipment to us. So they have to accommodate us. The second part of the question, MMRCA, am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. MMRCA acquisition is work in progress. To give you an idea of the complication involved, while it is true that our procedures also require some refinement, even with refined acquisition document, the request for information itself was consisted of 1,520 pages. And the final contract would be roughly 3,000 pages because it includes not only the conditions for acquisition, India-specific specifications, but also post-acquisition maintenance, production of certain spares locally, what is known as the technological give and take between India and the foreign partner. So all this to piece together requires time. This is true not only for the foreign aircraft or the MMRCA, for even the domestic Tejas aircraft. We have acquired some Tejas, but we have to acquire 83 Tejas, the assembly line for which is already ready. The draft agreements were approved in April, and yet the contract is supposed to be signed only by December. Why does it take so much time? Well, we'll have to think about it if we can do something. What was the third part, Mrinal?
So, yeah, that covers it, sir. You have already answered. One was why we are going for 4.5 generation when we have 5 already available.
Yeah. Okay. Why not 5th generation straight away? Well, we could have done that. But the trouble is, indigenously, that is within India, we have not yet developed the stealth technology sufficiently. And stealth technology being the latest, no exporting country is willing to really provide us with that technology which is the latest. Every exporting country, whether it is USA, USSR, France, this thing, will shy away from giving us the absolutely the latest. So till we develop our own technology, which is suitable for complete stealth, we'll have to depend on the next best from the countries which export. You see, the contract for co-production of Su-57 could not produce much beyond the initial stages because the Russians were unwilling to provide the stealth technologies to us. They were willing to meet every other condition of production in India, providing the spare parts production capacity to Indian companies and so on and so forth. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, sir. So the next question is, can the UAV drop bombs or missiles?
Well, as yet, the UAVs or drones which we have got are not armed. But I showed you on the slide, but which I did not call out because we were already quite late. We are in the process of acquiring armed drones. Negotiations are moving steadily forward, but even the exporting country has to meet certain obligations, like getting the approval of their parliament or their president or whatever it is, and it takes a little time. So exactly when will they be acquired? I'm really not sure. But sooner or later, you can be confident that we will be acquiring them.
Great, sir. So the next question is about the visibility of the target. So is it done, does the pilot do it with his eyes, or is it done electronically? And the next part of the question is, do satellites help the pilot in visualizing the target?
Okay, the first part. Depending upon the clarity of the weather and the distance from the target, pilot can visually acquire the target provided it is good daylight or good moonlight and the target is suitably large and is not camouflaged. But if it is night
Okay.
or if it is bad weather, then it has to depend upon radar to identify it and to acquire it. Satellite can help in providing help in acquiring the target. For instance, the Balakot target was acquired through some help from the satellite. The coordinates for the target were acquired by acquisition from the satellite. That was done earlier because the target was not movable. But technologies have been developed wherein there is a provision for updating the coordinates of the target even while the missile is in the air and the aircraft is already airborne. Exactly how is it done is a matter of top secret information, and frankly,
Yes, sir.
I don't have it.
Yes, sir. So the next question is about same variant of the aircraft used by defense forces, different defense forces. So, for example, Tejas used by Navy, is it the same as used by Air Force, or are there any difference between them? And the next is, can Tejas be uploaded to make an Omni Omni role aircraft?
First part of the question, Tejas has carried out deck landings on the aircraft carrier successfully. There are some differences between the land variant and the carrier variant.
Okay.
Okay, like the hook, arrestor wire hook that is there in the naval variant is not there on the land variant. The Navy would like to have certain other refinements because of the peculiarity of using those aircraft deep into the sea, away from the shore, and availability of an alternative field to land. Navy would prefer a two-engined Tejas.
Okay.
HAL is in the process of developing that, but it will probably take a couple of years. But the capability of Tejas has been proven for landing on a deck of the aircraft carrier. So there is no reason to doubt that sooner or later, and sooner rather than later, we will see a naval variant with two engines instead of one of the land variant, and the arrestor hook and other things that are provided, sometimes in the form of a foldable wing so that the storage on the restricted space of the aircraft carrier is easier.
Great, sir. So the next question is there a possibility of using hypersonic missiles and laser ammunition with combat aircraft? Are there any aircrafts that currently possess this capability?
I'll answer the second part first. Some of the missiles that could be used even by our aircraft do have the capacity of supersonic speeds of 3 to 4 times the speed of sound. The BrahMos missile variant is being developed with the capability to go beyond 5, which will be the hypersonic speed range. USA, Russia, and China are very deep into the developing hypersonic missiles. And it would appear and has been considered by certain Western sources that China is slightly ahead of Russia and USA in developing hypersonic weapons.
Okay, sir. So the next question is, what is the ratio of payload to total load of fighter aircrafts when compared with commercial crafts?
There is no fixed ratio as such, but by and large, when you consider the two types, the fighter aircraft has a much better power to weight ratio than a civil aircraft. And that is why it is able to maneuver like that, go supersonic, climb at such a high speed, and so on and so forth. There is no space wasted in a fighter aircraft for accommodating passengers, as you might notice, or cargo, or galleys and toilets, and so on and so forth, or other passenger amenities like TV screens and wind screens and other things. Okay, so the weight saved and the space saved by such designs is used for carrying weapons and extra fuel.
Okay. So the next question is, the design of passenger aircraft is approved by FAA. Who approves the designs of military aircrafts?
Strictly speaking, all aircraft designs, whether they are passengers or fighters, are approved by the host country. We'll come to the civil aircraft first. What has happened the world over is that the FAA has developed a system of regulation, a system of supervision, a system of checking out the aircraft parameters, of laying down rules like how many test flights should it do, what kind of documentation should be maintained during these test flights, how the systems during the test flights are checked, etc., etc. FAA has got the most versatile and dynamic system for this. So what the other countries have done, most of the other countries, apart from the FAA, apart from the UK and Australia, is that they have adopted the parameters taken by FAA straight on, and they are using the same parameters for approving the types of civil aircraft. As for the fighter aircraft, the QRs, that is the qualitative requirements, are projected by the armed forces. Therefore, in the USA, these are approved by the respective test engineers and test pilots of those services. These are not approved by FAA. But when buying these aircraft, the test pilots or other qualified pilots of the purchasing country do fly them, do evaluate them, and file a report, which is quite exhaustive, on the suitability of this aircraft. But as far as the FAA and the civil aircraft is concerned, they are the dominating force. There is no doubt about it. And most of the other countries just follow the FAA like the Pied Piper.
Okay, sir. One last question we'll take, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what difference does it make when we have single engine or twin engine? And a similar question connected to that is, what plan of action we have in case of twin engine if one engine fails? Does it return to base or what happens?
The first and the second question are interrelated. Why are the twin engine aircraft preferred? In a twin engine aircraft, if one engine fails, you lose 50% of the power. In a single engine aircraft, if the engine fails, you lose 100% of the power. So it is better to have at least 50% of the power, isn't it? Yeah. So that is why twin engine aircraft are preferred.
Okay, that's very nice, sir. Thank you so much. So I'll just wind up the session with a vote of thanks. Thank you, sir, for a very informative session. And thank you, Mr. Rochan Kulkarni, for the virtual tour to your amazing and exquisite miniature aero models. That was indeed very interesting to watch the multi-dimensional features rather than when we see on the picture in a single dimension. Thank you to our viewers for making this series a success. See friends, most of the times we get our defense related information for print or social media. So here is an endeavor to make the common man aware about the latest defense related information from the experts in that field themselves, and to know where we stand in technological terms on the global canvas. Hence, this is a platform where we get a unique opportunity to directly interact with professionals who have direct authority and mastery on the subjects. That is what Salute India strives to achieve, and we certainly will continue doing it in the future. So stay tuned. In order to remain updated about our future events, you can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. After this event is over, we'll circulate feedback form. So I would request all of you to fill that so that you'll get a link for the recording of this program in your email, along with our social media platform links. So thank you so much. Once again, a very happy 74th Independence Day to all of you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mrinal. Thank you, viewers. And my apology once again for the delay caused to you. Bye.